some of the things that Gendlin said, I know this doesn't necessarily resonate for you, some of his philosophy, but some of the things that he would say philosophically is this principle of interaction first, that the relationship, the body, environment are not kind of two, that somehow it's this constant interaction between the two. And I'm wondering how that fits with neuroscience, because sometimes the way it's spoken about, it can sound like it falls back into a model of a self-enclosed subject, and that there's something wrong inside of that person rather than in their way of being in a situation with other people or whatever. And I'm wondering if you address that tension in any way.
Yeah. Well, you see, uh, I, I, I would say that Gendlin
Yeah.
managed to write about the way our right hemispheres go about living and dealing with the world
Mm-hmm.
in his philosophical and experiential kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, he's a complete genius to be able to do that and to get on write a lot and say a lot about it. And you see, it's interesting with Gendlin because he was always rather hostile to science. But now we have this science-based account of the difference between the hemispheres. It's science-based, but it's also from Ian's work. A lot of it was at the Maudsley in London, Maudsley Hospital,
Yeah.
with stroke patients.
Okay.
That's a large part of them. When there's damage on one side of the brain and not on the other, and you see what the consequences are of that. And so the Master and His Answer is caught on amongst a lot of people. It's got a cult following because, again, it speaks to their experience of themselves.
Yeah, that the right brain, more sort of holistic sort of way of being, is more the felt sensing version of experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to put in my rider here. The problem with this is that inevitably we all tend to try to understand the right hemisphere and the difference between the left and the right hemispheres from a left hemisphere place.
Yeah.
Which never works. In the end, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. But particularly we focusers, know a lot about how the right hemisphere works because of our focusing experience. Things out. One of the things I felt about, what I noticed about focusing over the years, and probably applied to focusing on therapy, is there's a tendency, I think, for the therapist, the focuser, focusing person, and it might be the listener in a partnership, to hand over too much to the person who's focusing or they want to be focusing, and retreating too much themselves. There are two felt sensors in the room, one for the client and one for the therapist. And it's the therapist's responsibility to listen to their felt sense and to draw on anything and everything that they can sort of channel through their felt sense. And this thing of staying out of the way of the client's process, I don't really buy it. Get in there in the client's process, engage.
Yeah.
And, the big difference can be stated quite simply, can't it? Instead of the therapist being the expert, as in the classic sort of idea of psychoanalysis, the therapist is somebody has learned a bunch of stuff, more than probably the client has, and can offer things at appropriate time. And that's part of the kind of service that a therapist offers. That's my view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I know one of the objections to that certainly comes up when I'm teaching is that's too directive. And that there's this kind of worshiping of this fantasy of being non-directive, as though the moment you sit across from a client, your presence is already directive just because you're there.
Yeah.
But Can I just ask what you've just described, which I agree with, is there a neuroscience basis for that, the
Yes,
importance of that? I'd
yes.
love to hear that because that's
Well, it's quite simple. Our right hemispheres
yeah.
are putting together the outer world and the inner world all the time.
Okay.
The outer world includes the other person.
Yeah.
You and I are doing that now.
Yeah.
Client and therapist are doing that,
Yeah.
so that we all have a sense of self and a sense of the other, and they're all mixed in a way that our left hemispheres cannot pin down and define and can't really get it, can't really describe very well. You have to experience it, but it's a very fundamental human experience. People
Yeah.
just have to sort of hear about and find their way to it.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
And you see that's where a lot of neuroscience it completely dovetails with Jen Lin's thinking and can be a big support to what we do. Of course, anybody can take neuroscience, find a bit of neuroscience to support what they do and what they like doing.